I knew something was off the moment Heather strutted into the meeting room like she'd just won a damn Emmy for best performance in fiscal gaslighting. She was wearing one of those smug navy sheath dresses that screamed Forbes list reject, flanked by two junior analysts who looked like they'd been born in a Slack thread. Without even opening her laptop, she clicked the remote and fired up a slide deck titled Operational Optimization, Trimming the Fat. The words cost efficiency, legacy redundancy, and streamlined compliance were sprayed across the screen like confetti from a Wall Street divorce party. Then she smiled, tight-lipped, teeth barely showing, and dropped the hammer. We've reviewed all mid-senior compliance roles and identified several redundancies, she chirped, and I'm proud to say that we've already removed the fat. Effective immediately, Marcus Bell is no longer with the firm. Just like that. Not a pause, not a footnote, not even a damn thanks for your service cake in the break room. Marcus wasn't just a co-worker. He was the silent metronome in the background, the guy who didn't talk much but always had one eye on the covenant logs and the other on a physical binder he never let out of sight. A binder, mind you, that had outlasted 3 systems, 2 directors, and one particularly nasty audit back in 2018. But to Heather, he was bloat. The room didn't react. At least not out loud, but I saw it. The little twitch in Randy's jaw, the way Denise stopped typing, the subtle way our VP of Risk leaned back and crossed his arms like he was watching a train inch toward the edge of a cliff. Marcus, for his part, didn't make a sound, didn't ask why, didn't look angry. He just gathered his things, his badge, his coffee-stained notebook, and that damn red-tabbed binder, and walked out. That's when I started watching the digital dashboards closer. Because here's the thing, Marcus's name wasn't just on old memos and log files. He was the last person with sign-off privileges on a series of embedded covenant checkpoints that predated Heather's fancy new auto-approval workflows. He didn't just catch red flags, he was the firewall, and she'd just uninstalled him without even checking the wiring. If you're still listening, do us a favor, like the video and hit that subscribe button. Seriously, 97% of listeners forget, and it really helps the team keep these stories going. Anyway, by the time week 2 rolled around, no one had dared bring it up. Heather had moved on to unveiling her Lean Ops initiative, complete with pastel charts and buzzwords that made the analysts clap like trained seals. But I noticed something in the workflow logs. A field was missing, just one, buried 3 screens deep in the Covenant Compliance Review module, Marcus's field, the one labeled Legacy Risk Confirmed Analyst Sign-Off. It wasn't flagged, wasn't even skipped. It was just gone, replaced with an auto-check NA required. And no one noticed, or worse, no one cared. Heather kept waving her hands about how fast we were moving now. No more legacy drag, she'd say, sipping $9 cold brew from a mug that said disrupt or die. She bragged to the board that she'd saved the company $280K in streamlining non-critical functions. She meant Marcus. But me, I started making backups. Because Marcus didn't raise his voice, but I knew damn well he didn't leave empty-handed. He was too methodical for that. Too silent. Too good at building guardrails the rest of us didn't even know we were walking on. And guardrails don't scream when they're missing. They just let you fall. It started with a Slack message at 8:42 a.m. from Jaden, one of the newer senior analysts who still triple-checked his comma placements like it might save the quarterly forecast. Hey, random. Do you remember if Covenant Field 37C used to require manual analyst review? I stared at the message a few seconds longer than I should have, then typed back, Yup, always Marcus's field. Jaden didn't reply right away, which said more than any emoji could have. Field 37C wasn't just a formality, it was a pressure valve buried deep in the risk module, a legacy failsafe built back when our firm still worried more about exposure than headlines. Technically labeled debt service ratio escalation, Tier C threshold, but Marcus had dubbed it the oh hell no clause. It didn't trigger often, but when it did, it stopped deals cold. And now it auto-skipped. No warning, no note, just a tiny gray text under the new workflow dashboard, auto-approval triggered by Rule 6.2. Rule 6.2 didn't exist a month ago. Heather must have slid it in with the last system update, buried under a blanket approval from Ops. who probably didn't even read the flags because legacy fields slowed velocity. Heather, of course, smiled through it all like a beauty queen balancing spreadsheets on a high-wire act. She reassured the exec team in a Monday sync that automation is the new compliance and said that manual covenant checks were inefficient nostalgia, her exact words. We trust the system to warn us if something's wrong. That's the whole point of machine learning. Machine learning my ass. Marcus didn't trust the system. I learned later that during his final week, quiet as a snowflake in a blizzard, he booked an off-site lunch. Not with anyone from the team, not even with friends. With the bank. He used personal PTO, took his old leather messenger bag, wore the same gray blazer he kept on the hook behind his cubicle since 2017. The only reason I knew? Because I spotted the log from reception. EMSA Bell, visitor badge issued, Midtown Branch, Bank of Allerdale. And because 2 days later, I saw the courier tag on his desk drawer. Recipient, Risk and Compliance Officer, Lending Oversight Contents, Binder, Historical Covenant Integrity, Internal Use Only. He hadn't burned a bridge. He'd laid a fuse. Heather had no clue. She was too busy prepping her upcoming transformation talk at a fintech conference in Boston, where she planned to speak about how to eliminate redundant compliance noise in high-velocity firms. Her PowerPoint template had a section called Cutting the Dead Weight. I guess Marcus had been slide 3, but what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that Marcus had never once deleted a log file, never once signed off without printing a hard copy, never once made a change that couldn't be reversed. He was a ghost in the system, but his fingerprints were everywhere. The sealed binder he left with the bank wasn't just a record, it was a map. A living, breathing history of every safeguard Heather's dashboard had quietly killed. No drama, no farewell email, no keycard stunt. Just Marcus, stepping into a bank conference room, handing off a plain red-tabbed binder and saying 8 words. You'll want to review page 37 first. Then he left. Walked out like a man who knew gravity was real even if everyone else had stopped believing in the ground. 2 weeks later, everything smelled like a win. The exec floor buzzed with a kind of manic optimism, the kind only $30 million in projected credit leverage can buy, and Heather was practically floating on her stilettos. I watched her glide from conference room to coffee bar, spinning numbers like cotton candy, growth charts, cash flow forecasts, pitch decks with verbs like scale, accelerate, dominate. The centerpiece? A $40 million revolving credit line from the Bank of Allerdale. Locked, loaded, almost ready to go. Heather had already started referring to it as our liquidity trampoline. I'm not kidding. I heard her say that. Twice. To actual grown adults. In her pre-committee email, sent to half the damn building and CC'd to the board, she included a bullet point that made my skin crawl. Removed unnecessary layers from covenant checks and legacy compliance. Workflow now streamlined for speed and clarity. Streamlined, as in gutted. There was one problem. The bank's head of lending compliance, a man named Roland Park, who looked like he'd been carved out of oak and worry, replied with a request. Polite, straightforward, unavoidable. As a matter of process, we'd like to speak with any former compliance officers who previously handled covenant safeguard protocols, especially those familiar with long-standing internal approval logs. I was in the room when Heather read it. She laughed, out loud. That's a formality, she said, waving the email like it was a coupon. Marcus didn't manage anything that isn't now covered by the dashboard. She drafted a breezy reply thanking Roland and confirming that our system now handles covenant validations digitally and that no manual override personnel remain active. No personnel, no override, no Marcus. Except Roland didn't stop there. Quietly, through a back channel, the way all real risk management happens, someone from his team reached out to our internal liaison. Not the one Heather looped in, the other one, Janet Morris. Janet's the kind of woman who doesn't speak unless it's written in a compliance charter. She read the request, didn't forward it, didn't reply with emojis. She picked up her desk phone, an actual landline, and called Marcus. And Marcus? He answered. I didn't even know he still had the same number. 3 days later, there was a new name added to the guest list for the credit committee review. Bell, Marcus R., External Compliance Observer, Bank Liaison. Heather didn't even see it. The request had been logged by Roland's team, filed through legal, and buried in the visitor summary. But I saw it. And I watched Marcus arrive. Same gray blazer, same messenger bag, same quiet, unreadable face. He came 30 minutes early, sat in the back corner of the conference room like he belonged to the carpet, and placed a single folder on the table in front of him. Red tab, labeled in his handwriting. He didn't look angry. He didn't even look interested. He looked inevitable. Meanwhile, Heather was holding court at the far end of the room, giving a TED talk to the bankers about how lean methodology unlocks financial agility. Every sentence more confident than the last. Every slide a celebration of what she'd cut, streamlined, or eliminated. No mention of what she'd buried. No idea what was about to resurface. Because when Marcus finally opened that folder and placed it face up in front of Roland Park, I swear to God the air in the room changed. It didn't creak. It coiled, like a switch had been flipped and the room just hadn't caught up to the sound yet. And Marcus, he didn't speak, didn't gesture, just looked at the man across from him, then tapped once, soft and final, on page 1. He'd packed one last folder, the one with teeth. Roland's team showed up polite, sharp, and straight from a central casting call for men who kill deals with a pen. You could tell they weren't there for the coffee. They came in with prep packets, color-coded tabs, and a very specific list of items to review before the credit line would be approved. Most of them were standard: baseline liquidity thresholds, debt service ratios, interest coverage tests. But one field kept circling back like a vulture. Reporting requirement 4B. It was small. A clause tied to high-risk subcategories within our Tier C lending, triggered only when both cash flow dipped below 1.6x and loan stacking crossed 22%. The kind of thing you'd miss unless you were looking. And Roland? He always looked. What raised the flag wasn't its presence, it was its absence. In the prep documents our finance team sent, reporting 4B was listed as waived mid-cycle. No explanation, no amendment, no timestamp. Just waived, system flag, cleared by template update 602. That should have been impossible. Even Heather's new dashboard didn't have the authority to clear active reporting requirements without dual sign-off. And no one could remember doing it. Hell, no one could even remember the clause existed until Roland's guy asked about it. Heather, flanked by her usual parade of cheerful ignorance, brushed it off with a wave. "Oh, that's just a formatting cleanup," she said, flipping through pages like she was browsing a Pottery Barn catalog. "Our templates got streamlined last quarter. Non-critical flags were deprecated to reduce visual clutter." Visual clutter, she called it. Roland just raised one brow, not a full expression, just enough to suggest his internal DEFCON moved from 2 to 1. Meanwhile, deeper in the belly of the building, a junior finance associate named Kyle, poor guy hadn't been out of grad school long enough to lose hope, was pulling old log backups for version comparisons. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, just knew that Roland's people had asked for original sign-off trails on any covenant amendments marked legacy flag. 30 minutes later, he stopped breathing. Buried in a September log entry 2 months before Marcus's departure was a single notation: flagged, threshold crossed, Tier C, MBEL, initialed. That's it. No resolution, no override, no follow-up. Marcus flagged the breach, but the record went cold after he was let go, which meant no one had cleared it. Not legally, not officially, which meant the system override was phantom, artificial, a ghost of a cleanup operation run through Heather's efficiency update. Kyle screenshotted it, showed his direct manager. She paled, didn't speak, just whispered, "Do you think Roland already knows?" He did. That's why he'd asked about former compliance officers. That's why he let Marcus walk into the room like a librarian carrying a live grenade. Back upstairs, the mood shifted. Heather was still talking, still pointing at charts. But no one was really looking anymore. Eyes drifted. Conversations got quieter. Phones buzzed silently. And that old whisper started crawling through the ranks like it always does right before the floor gives way. Did we actually review those terms? Wait. Who signed off on 4B? Is this system approved or person approved? When did Marcus flag it? The funny thing about whispers? They don't need speakers to travel, just silence big enough to echo in. And Heather? For the first time, she stopped smiling between slides. You could see her blinking more, fingers tapping harder on the remote, joking less, explaining more. Doubt doesn't arrive with sirens. It walks in with questions no one's ready to answer. And suddenly, everyone realized the smartest guy in the building had been sitting quiet at the end of the table all along. You could feel the tension in the conference room before anyone said a damn thing. The walls seemed too white. The AC too loud. Everyone was trying a little too hard to act normal, pretending they weren't aware that something sharp was humming just beneath the surface. Heather took her seat at the head of the table like it was her throne. She adjusted her cuffs, gave a nod to the investor rep dialing in remotely, and flashed that PR-smoothed smile she always wore when numbers were in her favor. Her slide deck was already loaded on the screen, branded with a sleek title, Strategic Liquidity Alignment, Phase 1, Accelerated Approval. She opened strong, of course. Thanks to our recent streamlining efforts, we've eliminated redundant workflows and trimmed the fat. And that means we move faster now. Leaner, cleaner, smarter. Cue the polite chuckles. Someone from legal coughed into their sleeve. Across from her, Roland Park, the banker, remained silent. Not rude, just unreadable. He wasn't looking at the slides. He was flipping slowly through a thick document his assistant had prepared. Occasionally, he'd pause to underline something. Occasionally, he'd glance over his glasses at the attendees. But mostly, he just listened. The way hunters listen in the woods. Marcus sat at the far end of the table. Not dressed up, not dressed down. Just present. You might not have even noticed him if you weren't looking. No nameplate, no company logo, just a plain notepad, a closed pen, and a man who knew what everyone else had forgotten. Heather breezed through the first 10 slides. Forecast models, drawdown strategy, credit efficiency scenarios, all piped through that same hyper-optimistic narrative. The room smiled, nodded, annotated, but nobody leaned forward. And then, somewhere between slide 11 and projected yield optimization, Marcus moved. Not abruptly. No dramatics, just a single motion, measured, deliberate. He reached into his messenger bag, pulled out a folder with a red tab on top, and placed it in front of him. The motion drew eyes. Not all, just enough. Then, with both hands, he slid it across the table toward Roland. No announcement, no commentary, no plea, just paper gliding over laminate, quiet as snowfall. Heather paused, mid-sentence. Is that something from the... Roland held up a hand, didn't look at her, just opened the folder. Inside were 2 things. The first, an original covenant report dated 3 months prior. Marcus's signature at the bottom, flagged in red ink. Tier C threshold exceeded, mandatory review required. The second, an internal log export showing the covenant's removal. No analyst review, no board approval, just a system override time-stamped 2 weeks after Marcus's termination. User ID listed, Finance Admin HE Heather's ID. Roland flipped pages. His face didn't change. His hand just moved faster. Highlighter, paperclip, sticky note. The room was a graveyard by now. Heather tried to recover. That must be an old... No, Roland said flatly, eyes still down. This isn't old. This is incomplete, and it directly contradicts the reporting we received. She blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her next sentence died somewhere between her throat and her pride. Is that breach material? Someone from legal asked. Marcus didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The folder said everything. It screamed, actually. It said, I saw this coming. I warned you. You ignored it. It said, I left a record because I knew you'd delete the truth. It said, you can spin whatever story you want. Here's what actually happened. The banker turned the page one last time, then looked across the table, not at Heather, at Marcus. His voice was low, deliberate. Was this flagged while you were still employed here? Marcus nodded once. Yes. And was it cleared through proper review channels? No, Marcus said, still calm, still composed. It was removed post-termination. Silence. Heavy, choking silence, the kind that makes every person in the room suddenly remember the exact terms of their D&O insurance. Heather's face had lost all color. Her fingers clenched the remote in her hand, tight enough to bend plastic. Marcus didn't gloat, didn't smirk. He just sat back in his chair like a man who'd handed in the truth and didn't care what they did with it. Poised re-entry. No theatrics, just facts. And the weight of every single one of them landed with a dull, unstoppable thud. The moment Roland's fingers hit that tab, bright red, typed in Marcus's clean, all-caps font. Covenant breach, auto closure risk. The air in the room went tight like someone had cinched an invisible noose around the walls and started pulling. He didn't speak right away, just flipped the page, highlighted 3 lines, circled 1. That sound, the soft scritch of a pen on paper, cut louder than any siren. A junior lender from Roland's team leaned in from the side, whispering before he could catch himself. "Is that active?" Roland didn't look up. He just nodded once. Firm. Grave. It never should have been unchecked. That was when the silence changed. Before, it was uncertainty, the kind that hums during tense moments and awkward transitions. But this was recognition. Everyone at that table knew what auto closure risk meant. It meant the deal didn't just have a bump. It had a hairline fracture straight through the spine, and the clause tied to it wasn't theoretical. It was loaded, waiting. In our agreement with the Bank of Allerdale, there's a clause, small, buried, but ironclad. In the event of an unmitigated covenant breach, if the safeguard validation protocol is absent or deactivated at the time of discovery, the bank reserves full rights to freeze or revoke the credit facility pending investigation. Heather had signed that clause herself. She pushed for the language to be boilerplate, called it non-invasive downside insurance. I remember her saying it over lunch with the legal team, like she was explaining the fine print on a toaster. But now, that clause was very real, and the safeguard, Marcus's Field 37C, had been wiped clean. "Would someone like to explain this?" Roland finally asked, his voice level, but sharp enough to draw blood. No one moved. Heather sat like a wax figure, eyes locked on the folder like it had grown fangs. Her lips parted slightly, as if a rebuttal was forming, but nothing came. Her hands gripped the table edge so hard her knuckles had gone white. She started, but the words came out thin and brittle. "That system, the update, we weren't notified that field." Roland raised a single hand, not aggressive, just enough to cut her off without saying a word. "I'm not asking for speculation," he said calmly. "I'm stating what's in front of us. There was a breach. The safeguard was removed. The clause is clear." He closed the folder like a judge ending trial. "Effective immediately, we will suspend action on the revolving credit facility until a full breach review is completed. You'll receive documentation within the hour." No yelling, no drama, just business. The board members didn't look at Heather. They didn't have to. The tension in the room pivoted entirely. She was no longer leading the charge. She was radioactive. Someone from legal scribbled something fast in their notebook. Another exec pretended to check their phone, but was clearly texting under the table. Marcus sat still, like he'd been there before, like he knew this playbook. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't savor it either, just watched it unfold, like clockwork. And Heather, she cracked, but quietly. Her throat flexed like she was swallowing a scream. Her voice, when it finally returned, was distant, small. We didn't mean to override anything." Roland didn't respond, because intent didn't matter now. All that mattered was the trigger, and the trigger had been pulled. Roland closed the folder with a soft thud that echoed harder than a slammed door. It was a full stop, an ending. The kind of sound that tells a room the conversation has officially changed direction, and not in their favor. "This file," he said, his tone flat but final, "should have had a legacy safeguard." No one argued. No one could. Heather stared ahead, eyes glassy, as if maybe if she focused hard enough on the far wall, time would reverse and unflip that red tab. But the wall didn't blink, and neither did Roland. Someone from legal, Daniel, I think, finally broke the silence with a voice so shaky it sounded like it belonged to someone else. Technically, that clause wasn't listed in the current workflow. It was never integrated into the new digital framework, so it's possible the system didn't recognize it. Even as he said it, he knew how stupid it sounded. Roland didn't even look at him. He turned, slowly, deliberately, and looked down the table, at Marcus. "Who maintained this clause before?" he asked, like he already knew the answer and just wanted the room to hear it said aloud. Marcus didn't shift, didn't adjust his chair. He simply folded his hands once and replied, quiet as a breath, I did, until I was removed. That was it. No dramatic pause, no smug tone, just 6 words, so clean they might as well have been stamped on brass and nailed to the wall. The boardroom inhaled all at once, like the room itself remembered what oxygen was supposed to feel like. I glanced sideways. Heather's jaw tightened, her fingers twitching near her laptop like she wanted to rewind the last month and delete her own decisions. But you can't control plus a $40 million mistake. You flagged this, Roland said, gesturing to the breach summary. Marcus nodded. Logged it. Yes. Physically documented it. Binder, page 37. Roland turned back to the table, addressing no one in particular. I'm not here to assign intent, but let's be very clear. This covenant breach was real. The only reason it didn't trigger earlier is because someone replaced a functioning safeguard with a non-existent one. Heather finally spoke, her voice raw and uneven. There was no malicious intent. We were optimizing. The old workflows were inefficient. Legacy structures, Roland interrupted calmly, are only redundant until the moment they're your only protection. His gaze landed back on Marcus. You kept a physical binder? He asked. Yes. You still have it? Marcus reached into his bag and set the original binder on the table like it was a crown. Red tabs, clean dividers, handwritten notations. Dated. Signed. Untouched by digital hands. Proof in 3 rings and 30 pounds of paper. Heather looked at it like it was a ghost come to cash its debt. And just like that, the boardroom shifted. No one was talking about dashboards anymore. No one cared about velocity or template efficiency or non-critical redundancy. They cared about one thing. Who had the binder? And it wasn't the CFO. It wasn't the system. It wasn't anyone in a tailored suit selling optimization like snake oil. It was Marcus, the quiet guy they fired, the one who didn't shout, didn't email legal, didn't burn the place down on the way out. He just kept the binder, kept the records, kept the truth. And now, everyone knew who held the weight of it. Marcus didn't gloat, didn't even blink. He just nodded once, like someone who knew he didn't have to say anything else. Because when the truth sits in a binder that heavy, it speaks all on its own. Roland didn't wait for another word. He didn't need a motion, a vote, or a second opinion. He simply placed his pen down beside the closed binder, folded his hands, and spoke with the kind of calm that only comes from knowing the facts are already doing all the talking. Per protocol, he said, the revolving credit facility will be paused, effective immediately, pending a full internal breach review. Heather jolted upright. Wait, no, that's premature. We're not in breach. That clause, Marcus wasn't part of our active sign-off protocol when this deal was drafted. Roland didn't even turn his head. He was already gathering his things. The breach was flagged while he was still employed. The safeguard was removed after. The clause is valid. The exposure is active. That's not a gray area. That's compliance. Heather fumbled for her laptop. We have audit trails, system logs. I'll pull them now. We can prove there was no deliberate intent. But she stopped, because she couldn't find them. The new system didn't preserve rollback logs on legacy field removals. The audit trail? It didn't exist. Not since she ordered the compliance workflows purged of manual checkpoints. That system update she'd been so proud of, the one she demoed on 3 investor calls and featured in her Lean Ops conference pitch, it deleted her parachute, and the room knew it. Every board member slowly turned toward her, not aggressively, not accusatorily, just turned, watching, waiting. No one spoke, not one person said, she meant well. Not one person said, let's be fair. They just let the silence grow heavy enough to crush what was left of her authority. Across from me, our risk officer, Julia, stared down at her phone for a long moment. Then she typed something slowly and carefully, the way people type when they know their message will leave a mark. I felt my own phone buzz seconds later, a forwarded screenshot. Julia, to Marcus. They're asking if you'll come back for now. I said I'd ask. I don't expect a yes, but I told them you'd read it either way. I glanced up at Marcus. He hadn't moved. Still calm, still silent. Binder resting beside him like a sleeping dog. If he saw his phone buzz, he didn't acknowledge it. He didn't need to. The offer wasn't a favor, it was a consequence. Heather slumped back into her chair like someone had just flipped off the power inside her. She blinked at her laptop screen, lips moving slightly, but whatever protest she'd been about to launch had already expired. Roland rose slowly, giving a short nod to the room. We'll reconvene after the breach review. Your legal counsel will be looped in. Until then, the facility remains frozen. Thank you. He turned to Marcus just once and said, "Binder, please." Marcus stood, picked it up, handed it to him. No theatrics, no glare, no triumph, just a clean handoff of the thing that mattered most. And then he left. Quietly. He didn't say goodbye, didn't look back, didn't need applause, just the certainty that, for once, the people who cut corners were finally standing in the mess they made. And the man who'd kept every receipt, he was already gone. 2 weeks passed like a slow exhale after a long panic. The credit line remained frozen, locked under the weight of red ink and forgotten clauses. Internally, it was chaos in disguise, smiling board memos about process reevaluation, whispered meetings between risk and legal, and one particularly tense shareholder call that ended with someone muting Heather mid-sentence. By the following Monday, a single-line announcement circulated to the leadership team. Effective immediately, CFO Heather Connors will be stepping down for personal reasons. No party, no cake, no slideshow of accomplishments. Just a vanishing act and a shared understanding that personal was corporate code for we couldn't keep defending her. HR moved fast after that. Too fast. They didn't even update the org chart before posting the job requisition. Covenant Integrity Officer, External Liaison. The phrasing was surgical, not internal, not managerial, liaison, a bridge between compliance and the lender, who now had full veto power over every safeguard protocol going forward. The next day, Marcus walked through the front doors, same gray blazer, same calm presence, a new badge clipped to his lapel, different color lanyard this time, the kind only external consultants wore, the kind that didn't clock in but still ran the room. People didn't cheer, didn't clap, they just stepped aside. Respect has a sound, and in that moment, it was silence. His office wasn't in the compliance pod anymore. They gave him a glass-walled room just off the legal wing. High visibility, low noise. There was a fresh binder waiting on his desk. Red tab, blank pages, his initials already embossed on the cover. But the old one, the one that had changed everything, was no longer tucked away in a drawer. They'd framed it, enclosed in glass, sealed behind UV protection. Mounted in the main corridor outside the boardroom with a brass plaque underneath. Historical Covenant Integrity Log, Tier C maintained, M. Bell outcome, credit freeze prevention, 40 mailer facility status, active reference. People passed it every day now. Some slowed to read it, others kept walking but glanced like it held a quiet kind of weight they couldn't quite name. And then Roland came back. No briefcase this time, just a single folder under his arm and a moment to spare. He didn't head to a meeting. He didn't ask to speak with legal. He just made his way down the corridor and stopped in front of the case. Marcus was there, updating a printout for one of the new threshold overlays. Roland tapped the glass once, lightly, like someone knocking on memory. "This file froze 40 million, he said, almost to himself. "Keep it in reach." Marcus didn't smile. He didn't need to. He just nodded once and went back to work.